Hi, everyone. This is Jenna Rufo, the Director of Special Education and Student Services. And today we're going to talk about essentialization. Essentialization is a process that we can use to really boil down the standards to their most key concepts so that we can provide meaningful access to our students who have significant barriers to learning. So, as we're moving through this screencast today, I want you to presume competence. And what that means is that in the absence of any type of valid or reliable data of what a student is or isn't able to do, the assumption we should be making is the one that will do the least amount of harm should it later be realized the assumption was wrong. So, in other words, make the assumption that should you be proved incorrect would least harm the student. So, if we're not sure whether a student is capable of accomplishing something, we want to assume that they can and give them that exposure. And if we set our goals high and we need to scale back a little bit, that's okay. But we always want to shoot higher and make sure that we're challenging our students and holding them to high expectations. And essentialization is one way that we can try to reach students who might have significant disabilities or other barriers to learning via language or for whatever reason, different kind of backgrounds. Essentialization can help us to scaffold our instruction so that we're hitting those key points for all of our students. So what is it? Essentialization is a systematic process that's used to reduce the depth, the breadth, and the complexity of grade level content standards in order to make them relevant and accessible for our students with significant cognitive disabilities. And as I just referenced, while this was originally initiated and this whole idea of essentialization was geared towards our students with disabilities, for our students who may have other challenges, it can also be beneficial. And essentialization is a way that we can target the most essential skills. So what? You might be saying, well, I teach AP or I have the challenge math class and I don't have students who have significant disabilities in my class. Regardless of whether you currently have those types of students in your class, one, you may be getting them soon. But second, this will still help you identify the most salient points of a topic so that you can scaffold your instruction. And if you're able to essentialize the content for learners who have the greatest instructional needs, then you can figure out how to do this for anybody. We're going to go through some examples and we'll start with elementary school. So here is a second grade ELA example. The standard says, describe how characters in a story respond to major events and challenges. So in order to essentialize the standard, here's what we're going to do. First thing is to underline our verbs and box the nouns. Here's the standard. So our verbs, describe, respond. Here are our nouns, characters, story, events, and challenges. Next, we want to essentialize the standard by transforming the language, limiting the scope of what we're expecting, and eliminating any extra text. So if we were to do that, we could say that the essentialized standard has three different components: describe the characters, sequence major events, and describe the problem. So in the initial standard, it was respond to major events, but for some students who may be working on sequencing as a skill, getting things in the proper order, we can slightly alter it. So that's something that you can do for your PASA eligible students, is to slightly alter that standard. We don't really want to be teaching something that's completely separate and unrelated, but just finding an access point for them. So you need to decide, are you going to address all parts of the essentialized standard? So looking back, the describing characters, sequence major event, describe problem, are you hitting all three of those for a student? Or are you just going to look at some? And as a reminder for our PSSA and Keystone eligible students, you're going to need to hit everything, but you can use essentialization to break it down and scaffold. For our PASA students, again, we can reduce and modify. So what might that look like? Here's an example, just a simple graphic organizer. Book was Johnny Appleseed. They have a web where students can write in their thoughts. Another example, taking it up a little level, or down, I should say, is giving students some other vocabulary and terms that they can select which ones are appropriate. So if we look here, we have loved apples, traveled north, traveled west. So the students would need to look at all of these statements and figure out which one did Johnny Appleseed actually do. Third example is for a student who communicates mostly by pictures. This was for a student with autism. And that student had to just two choices. And the child had to either pick, did Johnny Appleseed love animals? Did he love fish? Circle one. Did he eat bananas? Did he plant apple trees? So that is one way that that student could access that same grade level text. Maybe he would receive modified text. Maybe he would just listen to it. But this is a way that we can measure his comprehension on the same standard and the same story that all of his peers are reading. If we're looking at sequencing events, here's a modification that I saw when I was out in one of our buildings. This one, we had just a sentence frame, first, next, then last. And then there were pictures of the story that were available. The student cut out the pictures and then sequenced them in the correct order. Here's another elementary example, fifth grade science. Recognize that moving electric charges produce magnetic forces and moving magnets produce electrical forces. This is the idea of electromagnetism. So there's a lot going on in that, a lot of language, lots of things we're asking students to recognize. So here we go. If we're going to essentialize, we underline the verbs, box the nouns, and then simplify the language. There's our verbs, here's our nouns in the boxes. And now to simplify that, really what this is asking us to do is recognize that magnets and charges produce forces. So here's a task that a fifth grade class was asked to perform. Fifth grade science students were presented with this task and it spanned over the course of several days. So that's important. I want you to think about that because some of the ways that you might modify this could be very quick, but we need to think about what are these students going to be doing over the course of several days when peers are working on this assignment. So here it is. Use the following prompt to write to inform. One of the county's trucks dropped an entire load of nails on the playground at your school. The principal is very upset and has asked your class to come up with a way to pick up the mess on the ground. Using what you know about electromagnetism, write a letter to the principal explaining why you need a stronger magnet to pick everything up. So if you were here with me in front of me, the question I would ask is, how do you make this meaningful for students with low incidence disabilities who have limited writing skills? And there's a lot that they're being asked to do. It's really an application exercise. So we've gone over electromagnetism in science, and now we're going to write about it. So before I move ahead, I think you also need to look at this and decide for your students who have low incidence disabilities, what's your goal? Is your goal for them to use this as a writing task, or is your goal to use this as a science task? Because that's going to change the direction you go in. And if you're talking about past eligible students, we can do that. We can modify and determine which one is most appropriate. So for the fifth grade example, here's what we did. Students built a model of the playground. They used paper clips to serve as the nails, and they created an electromagnet with a battery, nails, and wire to demonstrate the solution to the problem, and then presented it to the class. So for this group of students who were working on some alternate skills, who had some more significant disabilities, the goal wasn't so much the writing piece, but getting them to understand the whole concept of electromagnetism and that magnets have forces, using the battery, and all of those key concepts. So we didn't focus as much on the writing skill as we did the science, and that's okay. Again, it's really what's most appropriate for the child and making a judgment in terms of what is your goal for them to get out of this lesson for your students who have the more significant disabilities. So we're going to pause here. And then our next part 2 of the screencast, is going to give you some secondary examples. Okay, so now we're moving on to part 2 of essentialization, and we're going to look at some examples from the secondary level. So here is an example from middle school, and really across the board, we are asking our students to be working on text-dependent analysis. This is an 8th grade standard. Determine a central idea of a text and analyze its development over the course of the text, including its relationship to supporting ideas, and provide an objective summary of the text. So if we were to essentialize it, we're going to underline our verbs, box the nouns, there we go, and then transform it by limiting the scope of what we're looking to do and eliminating the extra language. So we're asking students to determine the main idea, identify supporting details. Now you will notice that details was not used in that standard. However, details can be related to the idea of the development of the text. Really, that's just more simplifying the language for the student. And we're asking them to summarize. Here's an example that Meg Burke, one of our instructional coaches, put together of a graphic organizer for middle schoolers working on text-dependent analysis. So you'll see over here, whoops, I'm going to go ahead one. We're looking at the beginning, the middle, and the end of a text. She's asking them to add specific evidence in this second column here. Be specific, you can directly quote, you can have a reference there, and be accurate. And then the last column, so what? So how is this connected to the evidence? It needs to wow the reader. So she's giving them a clue of this is how to write in a more interesting style. So taking it down another notch, you might have some students who need a little additional support than what's provided just in those open boxes. So we could give them prepositional phrases along here. We could give them the subjects and then a choice of verbs. Now, if we were modifying for students who had some more significant needs, you could also provide them with pictures. And I would also probably suggest just giving them a few choices in these columns rather than a whole list. Okay, so moving along, high school history. Here's a history standard that spans grades 9 and 10. Analyze the impact of the business cycle on individual and group behavior over time. Analyze characteristics of economic expansion, recession, and depression. Now, when I was looking for examples, I just pulled this off of a teacher's website at the high school, and this is what he was asking his students to do for the marking period 2 objectives. I won't read it all out loud. You can see it there. So when we're looking to essentialize, again, we underline the verbs, box the nouns. There's a lot of information there. So if we pull it apart a little bit more, and again, when we're looking at just essentializing the standard for our students who have more significant disabilities, we can just pick a few things we want to work on. So here we have define, describe, explain, our key concepts or key nouns, our New Deal components, and results. So to transform that standard, we are asking our students to define the New Deal and describe the results. So one way that we could do that for our students who have significant disabilities is by modifying the text or providing a summary. And this is something that your inclusion facilitators can help you with. And that's why they're there. They're there to help you with these heavy modifications for students who have significant needs. So I want to show you something. Here's the modified text, but I also want to show you a great tool on Google that you can use. Now, if you notice up here, I have my little read-write puzzle piece. And what that does is it allows me to read the text, or it should. Here we go. Okay, so I highlight the words that I want read, and then I press play up here.
In 1933, America was in a Great Depression. People were losing their jobs and did not have money to take care of their families. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, was the president.
So you can see I just highlighted the text and then I went up there to play the feature. There's also some other great features here where you can highlight. There is a translator, although it has limited access in terms of the different languages, but it's a really great feature that you can use, especially since we have so many things on Google now. And again, it's this little puzzle piece that I have here in my extensions. And if you go to the Google Web Store, it's a free app that all of our teachers have access to. It's read-write. And this can really be helpful for our students, even those who just have some specific learning disabilities in terms of getting things read to them. Okay, so I'm going to go back to present mode here. So you can see in the modified text, we really boiled down to what, if I were giving someone, the general overview, what would that look like for our kids? So we want to know that there was a Great Depression. We want to know what that means, essentially. So people were losing their jobs. They didn't have money. They were upset. I also want them to know the components of the New Deal. So we want them to know relief, recovery, reform. And even just adding a picture in here, that can be helpful, not just for your kids who have significant disabilities, but just that visual of those 3 R's. And again, your inclusion facilitators are available to help you when you need to do things like modify text. Okay, so to recap, essentialization is a way that we can make standards accessible for students who have significant cognitive disabilities by reducing depth, breadth, and complexity. And even if you don't have these kinds of students in your class right now, you're probably getting them at some point. But also understanding essentialization can help you scaffold instruction. And then I just do want to caution you that we want to use our modifications sparingly and really for our students who have the most significant cognitive disabilities. So we may have some students who are in need of modifications, but if they are taking or will take the PSSA, the Keystone eventually, we really want to make sure that they're getting exposed to that grade level standard, and we can modify and then begin scaling back on those modifications for our students who are in need. All right, thank you. And that is what we have on essentialization today.